Okay, welcome back. Yeah, we're basically trying to go to our second hour. The second hour will be again two speakers, and we'll be talking about diseases and pest issues in ornamentals. So we'll start with Dr. Jean Williams-Woodward. So Dr. Jean Williams-Woodward is an extension pathologist, plant pathologist at University of Georgia in Athens. She provides statewide plant disease diagnostics and management recommendations, extension programming for ornamental plants in commercial greenhouses, nurseries, and landscapes, as well as an urban and commercial forestry, Christmas trees, alfalfa, and hemp. Hey, Jean, floor is yours.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. So it says I'm going to replace the current share to me. Okay. Let me pull up my slide. I always laugh when people do the when you do the pictures, because that was like me. I think that picture was taken like 2004. Is it not? Why is it not doing? Okay. I got it. Can you see it?
Yes.
Looks good, Gene.
Okay. All right. So yeah, it's like I said, it's taken, I think, 20 years ago, but I'm just going to give you a quick update on some of the plant diseases that we are seeing and some things that we saw this year. And I want to try to make sure there's time for questioning, and I don't want to shorten Shimat either. So one of the things that you may have actually heard about is about the VSD, or the dieback in deciduous trees. And we have the vascular streak dieback. There's been several different webinars about it, most of the research coming out of Tennessee State University, but mostly this was in deciduous trees and primarily in redbuds. And we were seeing some of the dieback that's actually happening with them, where you're getting this scorching kind of look to the leaves, as well as also individual stem dieback, and then eventually like the whole tops could actually die from some of on the plants. This on the left-hand side over here, hopefully you can see my mouse, this is the vascular streak dieback. We're calling it dieback, not a disease, because we actually have not proven pathogenicity yet. This is compared to a few years ago, we were seeing a lot of the bot canker dieback happening a lot within our red maples in particular. So one of the things about the bot canker is that's something we've had all the time. It's a disease, it's a fungus that's actually a complex of several different fungi that when they get into the plant, oftentimes through wounds or through openings, the fungus will colonize the interior part, cause cankers. And if you look in these pictures, you can see where, like down here in this one in the center, where it is green, that's the healthy cambial tissues. Where it is dark brown, that is where the bot canker is. Same thing for the tree on the right-hand side. You can see the areas of dark brown on discoloration within that cambial tissue. And that probably came in where that tree had a broken branch, because that tree, it was during hurricanes. And so the tree had fallen over. And with the bot canker, one of the things we do know about Botryosphaeria and the fungi that cause bot canker is that it actually survives within the plant all the time. So I can get just as much recover the fungi off of tissues and branches that do not show any symptoms as I can from plants, from branches and tissues that do show symptoms. So what it tells me is that the fungus is already there. It's inside the plant. And that is something that people have started looking at. And what they have found, that if there is a lot of high turgor pressure, so a lot of water within inside that plant, it keeps the fungus sort of held together in this stasis. If they actually have a water deficit, the fungus starts growing, and it starts growing sort of outward and kind of in width. And when it does, that's when we start seeing the cankers developing. We have actually seemed to reduce the bot canker developing within the trees by using various different systemic fungicides, like the propiconazole, as well as also that mefentrifluconazole. I haven't said that one enough, so I can't say it. But the actual brand name for it is Avelio. which also is hard to say. Whoops. But one of the things about it is that if you're applying this fungicide, seems like in the fall and in the winter with a Pentra-Bark, which is an adjuvant that actually helps to move that product, the fungicide, through the bark and into the vascular tissue, we seem to be getting pretty good control about canker, that we're not seeing as much of that death happening. So I think that's what we're still continuing to do. Okay. The vascular streak dieback, the organism that is associated with this is right now called Rhizoctonia theobromii. The type of symptoms, like here in this picture with the redbud, you're seeing the scorching on the leaf as well as the yellowing. It seems to be worse on some of the lighter colored or yellow colored, foliage colored redbud varieties, ones that are more purple and darker colored or darker leaf color. They seem to be less susceptible, it seems like, to this problem. We have not been able to prove pathogenicity because we cannot culture this fungus and actually try to get it back onto plants again. But the other thing about it is we're finding it everywhere. The researchers in Tennessee, when they were looking at it, they were pretty much finding it on almost every plant that they ever looked at. And to the point I was accusing them of just going outside to the landscape and testing everything. But it has probably about 30 different plant species that we've actually found it on. And we're looking at this, trying to figure out what's going on. I personally have an opinion about this, in that I think this may be a fungus very similar to the Botryosphaeria fungi, that they're there inside the plant living as an endophyte. And then if you stress that plant with anything else, like root disease or root heat stress of the plants being in containers, or whether it is cankers or any kind of injuries or wounding of anything that happens, poor nutrition, anything that's affecting basically water pressure within the plant, we may start seeing this dieback kind of symptoms as well. We don't really know about controls, but it does seem like the fungicide Postiva, which is a new fungicide as well. That is one that in the trials conducted in Tennessee, that seems to be the thing that works the best. So, and they are applying it anytime there is new foliage on the plants, primarily in the spring with the flush of new growth, as well as also then later on in the fall as well, or in the late summer when we start getting another secondary kind of flush of growth. The fungus, it seems like if you clean up the nurseries, clean up the areas, get rid of a lot of the fallen leaf litter, then it also seems to be that there's less of this fungus around. And so they tend to not see it progress as much. Disease management relies on sanitation, primarily the number one thing of keeping everything clean, and then also potentially using fungicides, spraying it onto the new growth, and the Postiva seems to work the best. Postiva is a combination product of two different active ingredients, and to be totally honest with you, I can't say them. I don't know how to say them. But the fungicide is Postiva. This is just some more information about the VSD. It tends to, we have seen it show up. It was identified in Florida on red maples. Typically, when you do see this kind of dieback, if you were checking for it, if you were to cut vertically on the stems, like here in the lower right-hand side, you'd actually see what looks more like streaking of the foliage, of this internal tissues. If you were to cut straight across with a pruner and cut crosswise, you might see something that looks like more like dots, like up here in the upper right-hand side. That kind of symptom pattern looks very similar to verticillium wilt. So if you were to Google this, you would find verticillium would be probably the thing that would show up the most. We do not see verticillium here in Georgia. Our soils actually are more acidic, and verticillium doesn't really survive well in our acidic soils. So we just really do not see verticillium causing many problems here. But if you were looking for this, you were seeing dieback in your trees, cut vertically on the stems that are actually showing some of the symptoms and see if you start seeing streaking in there. And that's something that we would have to then test for. The other thing we were seeing a lot of this year, especially in the spring, was actually anthracnose diseases. We had a very wet spring, and under wet, cool conditions, we see anthracnose. One of the things we were seeing a lot on was actually on some of the Japanese maples, where it is causing more of just spotting, irregular kind of blotchy kind of spots on the foliage. And then it also can cause stem cankers. There are several different fungi that actually cause maple anthracnose. So one of them is the Aureobasidium, which tends to cause more of the leaf spotting kind of symptoms. And then the other fungus is a Discula species that causes more of the stem cankers. And so when talk about stem cankers, this is what I'm talking about, like here in the middle of the slide. You're seeing lesions that are developing in kind of almost like tan kind of dieback areas that if you were to cut through this and expose the cambial tissues underneath, you would see what we're seeing here on the right-hand side, which is this darkly discolored tissue inside the stem. That's why with anthracnose diseases, we'll see leaf spots, but we also tend to see like tip dieback. And it's because of these cankers that develop. Eventually that would girdle or grow around that stem, cutting off all the water supply, and then the tips of the branches would die. That is where your fungus is surviving. So if you had plants that actually had some of that tip dieback earlier, or had some of this anthracnose earlier, if you still have dead stems on those plants, you will have anthracnose again next spring, especially if it is, again, another wet, cool spring. So going out and doing some pruning to try to remove those dead stems is going to help and reduce the amount of anthracnose you're going to see in the trees later on. You can use fungicides, but you're going to have to use them in the spring, trying to protect the foliage from actually becoming infected. There's a large number of different fungicides that are labeled for anthracnose. Most of those are listed in our Georgia Pest Management Handbook, and you can find that information actually online. You can get the Georgia Pest Management Handbook online, is what I meant to say. For the most part, though, anthracnose diseases do not kill the plants. They just cause some of those branch diebacks. We saw a lot of it this past year. We saw it mostly on mostly on oaks, as well as on the maples. We also see it on sycamore, and the London plane trees. That we're seeing a lot on that as well. It is spores being splashed from those dead branch tips, or the kind of cankered tips, being splashed onto the newly developing leaves is how you're getting the anthracnose disease. There can be some secondary infections in the summertime, but it's not always there. The one thing about the picture I'm showing here, that is oak anthracnose, but this year we had oak anthracnose causing a lot of spotting. What was it, 2 years ago? It seemed to be mostly leaf miners causing spotting on the oaks in the spring. So check your trees and check for leaf miners. And if you're not seeing a leaf miner, then it could be actually the anthracnose you're seeing. Anthracnose diseases, one of the things about them, as I have written here, is that you get severe infections will cause severe leaf drop. And when I say severe leaf drop, it will look like your leaves are just raining down from the tree. And so that can be very upsetting and concerning because you're getting a lot of leaf drop. That drop is going to happen. Just rake and remove the leaves, get rid of those leaves. A second new growth will develop from the axillary buds. And then those leaves, because the environment is different, tend not to get any infection. So it's not something you have to really worry about later on in the year. It's really just that early spring kind of growth. Okay. I wanted to mention a little bit about boxwood blight. We've been telling you about this for a long time. And I had a graduate student working on this project looking at boxwood blight survival, or the spore survival within the soil. And we've seen landscapes where we have had almost basically decimation of the boxwoods within those landscapes. And like here, this picture in the lower left-hand side, they were 70-year-old dwarf English boxwoods that were killed within a matter of months because of boxwood blight. But then we've also seen sites like this one, which is the Gazeta Gardens. That one has had boxwood blight in it since about 2014. And it's still there. Boxwood blight's still there. They didn't take out any of the plants. And the plants they're not thriving, but they're alive. And the biggest difference between some of this is that they don't let anybody in that garden anymore. And so a lot of the determination of whether boxwood blight is going to be something that's going to just wipe out boxwoods versus something that you might be able to live with is really depending upon the care. And I just want to show you just some symptoms of boxwood blight. If I'm being asked to look for boxwood blight, I'm usually looking around for the fallen leaf litter that might be underneath the plant. And then once I see that fallen leaf litter, like here on the left-hand side, then I'm going to start looking for black stem lesions, like here in the center picture, where I'll look for black those stem lesions that usually is going to lead to a lot of leaf drop. You can see that here on the right-hand side, where you have a lot of stems where the leaves look really oily kind of looking. And then you're also getting a lot of leaf drop amongst those plants. And then you might also see some leaf spotting. I don't rely on leaf spotting as the symptom that I'm looking for, because often those leaves that are spotted, they will drop from the plant while they're still green. So you may never see spots on the leaves because those leaves that have the spots have already fallen. So look for the defoliation and those fallen leaf litter underneath the plants to look more, and the black stem lesions, to be able to identify boxwood blight. One of the things I was talking about is whether we can manage boxwood blight in existing landscapes. Is just this picture. This was on the left-hand side is October of 2020. That was a planting of Kingston boxwood, which is like a dwarf bonsai kind of boxwood, or just very slow-growing boxwood. And you could see the amount of boxwood blight that is actually in that planting. The picture on the right is that same planting in October of 2023. And so it is, you can see the host has gotten bigger, the cephalotaxis has gotten bigger, or the U has gotten bigger, but you can see the boxwood looks okay. And there was boxwood blight in that hedge. It was just on the back side of the planting. So on the back side of the hedge, you could find it. You could find some boxwood blight, but on the front, it looks okay. And the main thing about this was the homeowner here is actually spraying fungicides himself. And so he's spraying fungicides every 2 weeks. And it is keeping the boxwood blight in check. They also have 3 dogs, and those dogs are restricted in that they cannot go into the areas that have boxwoods. So that's the other care, is the boxwood blight pathogen is spread often on fur of animals like cats and dogs. And if those animals are in and around the boxwoods, they will spread it from infected plants to healthier plants. And so they keep the dogs out of this area, and he applies fungicides. That may not be something that everybody can do, but that's what this person is doing. This is the same landscape, again, just showing 2 areas. This was in October of 2020 on the left-hand side, and October of 23 here on the right-hand side. You can see in this case, it's a different boxwood cultivar. These are American boxwood here. And one of the things about it is that it still has boxwood blight. It doesn't look as good as the other Kingston boxwoods, but the plants are alive. And so for this homeowner, that was enough. That was acceptable. So it's still poor growth, but it was acceptable amount of growth and acceptable amount of loss. It was better than actually ripping them all out. But again, they're keeping the dogs out of here, and they are spraying fungicides all season long, or pretty much all summer, with every 2 weeks. The other thing I mentioned about, we looked at infection, survival of the boxwood blight pathogen in the soil, and we did not find it. In areas where boxwood blight seems to be held in check, either with fungicide use or cultivars where we're not seeing a lot of new sporulation, we do not recover it from the soil. So we do not think that it actually can survive for long periods of time in the soil. However, if there is infection that is there and the pathogen is able to produce a lot of spores, then we will find it in the soil. So we can get reinfection. If you were to remove boxwoods and put new boxwoods in, you could get reinfection if the plants actually had a lot of sporulation prior to being taken out. So it's sort of a, yes, will it survive or not? It is all dependent upon the amount of care that's happening with those plants. If there's no care and boxwood is rampant, we will be able to recover it from the soil, and it will reinfect new plants. If you are caring for the boxwoods and keeping the pathogen from sporulating, then it will not survive. And you could go back in with actually new plants at that time. We still have, these are our boxwood blight management tactics. It's still, if you have it, if you could remove the plants, that's probably the best thing, because many people cannot afford to go out every 2 weeks and spray fungicides. If you need to disinfect pruning tools and clothing and gloves, especially sleeves or pants, using like Lysol disinfectant spray actually works very well. That's the ready to use spray. Installing a mulch barrier underneath the plants actually can help to reduce some infection as well from the fallen leaf litter. There are some varieties that are the resistant varieties, are touted to have resistance. They are the Korean types. They tend to retain their leaves more than the American and dwarf English boxwoods, but they still become infected. They just don't show as many symptoms. If you're applying fungicides, it's basically on a 7 and 14 days interval. For people who have commercial landscape companies, that's probably not something as feasible. You going in with some of the systemics will give you a little bit longer activity, but we don't often see as good a control with that as well. And probably the most critical thing for Boxwood blight spread is really, are there pets? This is this beautiful cat that I've shown pictures of him before. We nicknamed him Vector because he spread Boxwood blight everywhere. But this beautiful cat, and any cat or any dog that is moving through a landscape, could potentially spread the Boxwood blight. And so when I get masked, is this going to spread? One of my first questions is always, do you have pets? And when people say they don't have pets, check with the neighbors. Do they have pets? Because this cat does not belong to that home. It actually belongs to the neighbor, but it did a great job of spreading some Boxwood blight around. So that's something that's just look at that. Okay. I know I wanted to actually talk to you a little bit about some of the viruses. I just wanted to remind you, rose rosette virus is still out there. We've talked about that for a long period of time. Rose production in Georgia and our nurseries is even reduced even more. People are not putting in roses. If you do put in new roses, they're going to get infected probably within 2-3 years because we have so much rose rosette out there. The virus I wanted to tell you about was one that we were identifying this year, was actually a Hydrangea Ringspot virus. And this is a virus that when I first looked at the samples and the pictures that were sent to me, it looked, I would have said, this is thrips damage, this is herbicide damage, it could be anything. I'm not sure what it is, but it didn't, to me, scream virus. And really, this was a virus. This was this Hydrangea Ringspot virus. It is a mechanically transmitted virus. So anytime you're pruning, it can be spread on that with those pruning activities, as well as also for propagating off of infected plants. This is some more sample that came into our plant disease clinic. And in this case, we weren't seeing such distortion of the foliage, at least not yet. This was younger tip cuttings. But if you're looking here, you can see these tiny little rings developing on the leaves and in and around all the veins. And as well as there was also some distortion of the flowers. And that's what this virus will do. It will also cause that reduced flowering as well as some distortion of the flowering. But this is, there is no control for this virus. And we're actually seeing some of it showing up in some production as well as also in landscapes. But it is something to be looking for. And then also know that it is spread through pruning activities. So if you're a company you're propagating from hydrangeas, then make sure you're not propagating off of these kind of plants or plants that have these symptoms. If you're a landscape company, you do not want to be propagating off of, you want to be aware of the virus so that if you're going through and doing any pruning, you're not pruning already infected viruses. So I want to make sure that Shimat has time to actually talk. So I'm going to stop here because I just told you my doom and gloom, and I've got to tell you about how all your hydrangeas are going to die now. So I'll let him take over.
Thank you so much, Jean. So let's finish like a few minutes early, and I want to make sure that the questions are addressed. Okay, thank you. Let me move on, and I'll be the second speaker for this hour, and I'm an entomologist with the turfs and ornamentals. Give me 1 second. I hope you all can see. There we go.
I'm good.
Okay, thank you so much. So my plan for this, so Richie, can you do me a favor? Can you let me know like before like 5 minutes to 5?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can dip back into questions.
Yes, five
You
minutes
got it.
because I can't see from here as the screen. It's everything is gone.
Yeah, I will. So at 5 till, I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I'm trying to get this slide moving.
I have to click on it again since it probably pulled it off.
So I have to do it again.
You might just have to click on your slide and then you can use your keyboard.
Oh, okay, here we go. Got it.
I don't know why, but it pulls it away sometimes when you're messing with Zoom.
Yeah, thank you. So, okay, so today, I don't know how much time I got to go through, but I will try my best to hit the main points. So I'm thinking about going through three insect pests. They are invasive insects. Um, One we have, a couple of them we have here in Georgia, but the first one, the box tree moth, we don't have it. So before I start, I just want to ask you all, because we have a website for, it's called Turf and Ornamental Pest Management. You can get that QR code from here. And if you can sign up with your email and your name, you can get any new blogs, any new updates that we have on incident. Sometimes we also have pathology and weed science also yeah, regarding turf and ornamental. So if you sign up, you'll get an email saying a new post, new updates on anything. So, any updates on insects or new pest or old pest, if we write any article, it will show up. Okay. If you want to sign up, please do. Okay. To start with box tree moth. So this is a recent pest in US in the US, and this basically very specific on box tree boxwood, basically boxwood. And now, if you look at where it is spread, it is spread in states like Michigan, Ohio, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York. And there is one incident, one detection in South Carolina, but we don't have an established population in South Carolina yet. But it was detected. Same the case in Tennessee. It is native to Asia, but were accidentally brought in through Europe and Europe to Canada and came from Ontario all the way down. So it's first seen in New York and now it's spreading south. So all these states where these pests is found is basically quarantined. But bugs can fly, so the adults can fly and they can expand. It can be picked up by the wind and the storm and things like that. So, so much this quarantine will be very effective. So we expect, as any invasive insect, this insect will also spread with time. So the problem is this. So you can see the boxwood plants are basically destroyed. That's why this is I don't think we have any pest like this that can cause this level of damage to boxwood. So we know boxwood is so important to us, and they are grown widely, and in urban areas, of course, they are seen everywhere. So this pest looks like this. This is an adult, and you can see a brown coloration in the band coloration on the border of the wing, and there is a two comas that you see. The middle part of those wings are all white in color. So wingspan is about 2 inches wide, and adults can live up to 30 days, female. Um, and they can spread up to 6 miles. So they are not very great flyers, but they can fly. But the challenge is more like they'll be picked up by the wind and the storms that's moving from north, south, or whatever direction it takes, and that's how they spread, just like fall armyworm. Eggs are basically translucent greenish in color. They are typically laid under the leaves, okay, on the base of the leaves, not on the surface. And you'll see about 10 eggs laid per female, okay? And eggs hatch in within few days, like 2 to 3 days. And it all depends on temperature. And the first instars are gregarious. They stay together and they start scraping the leaf epidermal cells and start feeding. And as they grow bigger and bigger, you'll see they are light in color with a black stripes that goes lengthwise. With a black head. Okay, they overwinter in a silken casing. They make a webbing, and basically overwinter has a late instar larval stage. So they overwinter as a larvae. They pass through that, and as in springtime, the larvae come out and they will do some more feeding. They will pupate in the same silicon case that they made, silicon chamber they made. Okay. They pupate for 2 weeks, and there goes the adults comes out and mate and start laying eggs, and the cycle continues. So this is a picture showing the mature caterpillars. As you can see, they are light in color with a black stripe and the black head capsule that's very distinctive here. So they like cooler conditions, but they can go through about 5 generations. That's what we know. 5 generations. This is up north, but if you land here in the southern part of the US, then it's possible that can go through more than 5 generations. And we don't know how well it will do because our summers are really harsh, especially in central to South Georgia. So not sure how they will perform here. So, but based on what we know, they are doing really well up to 5 generations up in north. The problem is this, the damage it causes. So it starts off very minor with some leaf feeding. With time, as the population builds up with a couple of generations, it can decimate the plant. One peculiar thing about this caterpillar is that it can feed on the stem. So if the population is very high, it can scrape off the stem, and it basically disrupts the movement of food from the leaves to roots and water. Basically, that's how the plant basically succumb to this pest. Okay, that's why this pest is kind of dangerous in a way. We don't want it, but that's what it is. This is some few pictures about that. The caterpillar stage, as you can see, is that capsule is black in color. And they make some extensive webbing when damage occurs, and you got to see a lot of caterpillars. So it is very, very unique looking, kind of most of the leaves gone, and you must see a lot of caterpillars if that damage you're kind of guessing towards box tree moth. Management wise, if you can get it early, it's not difficult to manage. That's what I heard. Because just like Forlamiworm, like we know that as a caterpillar moves to 3rd, 4th, and 5th instar larval stages, it's very difficult even with effective insecticide. So same thing applies here as well. The younger the caterpillar, easy to manage. So that's what it is. And a lot of pyrethroids and spinosyd are proven effective. So I believe that diamides such as chlorantraniliprole, that is acylprin, and other products like mainspring and all should work as well. Multiple applications definitely needed. If you can do it early application of BT, if you want to go with BT, the strain Kostaki works very well. That's kind of shown with research. Okay, let me switch gears and move to another pest, that is spotted lanternfly. Again, it is the name says fly, but it's not a true fly. It is a plant hopper. Okay. The thing is that it can go after many hosts in this case. So unlike box tree moth, this is very kind of polyphagous. In other words, it can deal with multiple plant families. It is a pest now. We know it's a pest in not so much on peaches, but definitely on grapes that we know. On the landscapes, it is a problem. It can cause a lot of nuisance. It creates issues with aesthetics for sure. That's what the business right we are in. But it is rarely a tree killer. That's what we know. Okay, it doesn't go after unless it is a young tree and they are seeing a excessively higher number of bugs on it. Otherwise, it's not going to kill the tree, but it definitely make the tree look bad for sure. So right now, this is the spread. So it's been reduced in Allentown in Pennsylvania, and you can see with the time, it is 2014 when it was first detected. Now we are in 2024, about 10 years. this is a spread we are seeing. Okay, it is a serious problem in Tennessee right now, especially in 2 counties, and there is another county that is closer to Virginia that we know we have seen as a problem too. So 3 counties in Tennessee, it is a problem. We are seeing an established population. So in Tennessee, it was first detected in 2013, that is a year ago. Now it is in 3 counties. So it is so quick. So what the reason why I'm talking about this pest is detection is very critical. So this is more like creating awareness about this pest. We want to know early, the better we can intercept, and maybe we can reduce the spread in our state. But often the situation is that we come to know when the population is already established and not really like then the eradication or quarantine may not do well as we think. As you know, this pest is under quarantine in Pennsylvania, but still it is spreading. That's a situation. So this is detection. The red is where it was originally found and it's kind of established. That's what we think in Tennessee. Okay, this is all Tennessee story right now. Okay, but now you can see with all the green spots is the detections this year. You can see how they are finding around that first established population. This is on another county, not so much, but they are also spreading from that initial introduction. So just want to touch base on 2 things. One is the egg laying behavior. So they lay eggs towards I would say mid to late September. That's what we are seeing in Tennessee. Okay, it's more likely to be the case in our situation if it is established here in Georgia. So mid to late September, we are seeing egg masses. It's just like a mud patch. See, it's like a mud patch. And think about this happening on a tree, or we may not be able to see it properly because of that coloration. It camouflages very well with the tree bark color. And yeah, and they can lay on any place. So it doesn't matter whether it is a tree or your RV standing there or your car. It can be anything. So that's why this is crazy. So in Georgia this year, we have some detections. Okay, so this is the first time we are seeing detection in Georgia. That is from Fulton County. This I pulled from Georgia Department of Ag's website. Okay, I just did that this morning, and they are saying live populations. I don't know what exactly that means, but if it is a population, we are talking about a large numbers. But I don't think that's the case based on interaction I have. We saw a few detections here and there. That's what we saw this year. I hope it's not population build up here, but we'll know with time. So maybe next year we will know what's really the case is. Okay. So it is in Georgia now. That's news for us. So in last year, until October, we were saying it's not there in Georgia, but now we know it's there in Georgia because of the detections that we had in October. So I'll quickly move through this. One aspect of this pest is polyphagous, I already said, and I want to highlight few hosts here like maple, oaks, elms, and also dogwood. So these are some of the hosts we see in urban areas, especially in Atlanta and places in cities, right? So that is something to pay attention. And this is the shape. The problem with this pest basically is feeds on the trunk of the tree because it has a pretty long mouthpart. And as it sucks, it's basically put the straw into the phloem tissue, into the xylem tissue and the phloem tissue, basically phloem tissue, sorry about that, phloem tissue, where the food is transported. And they basically ingest more than what they need. And basically that's why you see all the honeydew that's produced and the sooty mold fungus that basically grows on the honeydew. And you'll see that a lot of trees covered black, turning black in color. So this is the adult, and you can see it is gray colored, about 1 inch long. Okay, it's not a small, very pretty insect. I would say as an entomologist, it's very pretty to see this insect, but there is a lot of them. That's a problem. And this is what I was talking about, the egg laying behavior. The eggs are laid, about 35 eggs are there, and they leave it like a patch. But with time, what happens with the mud patch thing, whatever is the covering kind of erodes out, and you start seeing eggs sometime in springtime. That's what we see. Okay. And this is the mud patch. And you can see in the springtime, this is what we see. So there'll be around 30 to 35, 30 to 50 eggs in a mass. Okay. And a female can lay up to 2 egg masses. These are the young ones. This is the first instar nymph, the first young stage of the spotted lanternfly. And as they molt into 4th instar, they become red in color, more like a Georgia color, red and black. But the first 2, 3 instars, young nymphs, they are all black and black with white dots. Okay. As they molt into 4th instar, look like that. And after that, they just directly molt into adults. They don't have a pupal stage. Okay, they directly molt to adults. Some feeding can cause this weeping. You see the sap oozing out. And that is something that we have seen in Pennsylvania. And these are some pictures that shows the sooty mold growing everywhere. If you look here on the ground, it's all pitch black. It's all people describe as if it's a rain falling down when you have infestation on a tree. That's the way people describe it. And because there's tons of them on a tree. There are few. Sometimes I don't think this is a very common thing, but if the honeydew production is too high, it can ferment because it's basically sugar, right? It can ferment and this can become this kind of not great looking. This lampshade trap is used in Tennessee to see the population where, the females like to go underneath and lay eggs. So this is one tactic they are using, and they can remove this and destroy the eggs. Okay. They are trying it, but you can reach so much because we have seen their egg laying up in the canopy. So it's very difficult to reach that far. And they are spread mostly along the rail cars, wherever the rail cars are stopped, and moving from north to south and different places. And as they're stopped here, the eggs hatch and they hop and spread that way. And people hitchhike, right? The eggs can be laid. We are finding eggs laid on, the trailers, trailers of the semi-trucks, cars, you name it. And they hitchhike as egg stage. And the springtime when they come, they hatch out and try to get established there. So I will make this as the last slide so that it has some question. Okay. So managing this pest, there are multiple ways. Contact insecticides work really well. But the problem is we are dealing with trees. So personally, I don't recommend spraying trees using pyrethroid insecticides. That's the one really works really well. That's not unless you are in a perfect situation where the pest control back, they are completely equipped for that because the drift and there is multiple issues with that. What we know that is systemic insecticides such as imidacloprid, dimethyl, and those products work really well, and they can be soil drenched around the tree, or trunk injections or trunk sprays that can be done and those things work too. So anything that is applied into the tree or applied to the soil picked up by the tree is the best tactic right now to manage this pest. Okay. Okay, let me stop here because the time and
Hey,
also some time.
Shimat, I don't see any new questions yet. Jean has been answering them in the chat too as we keep going. So I think if you have a few more slides that you want to cover, I'll keep an eye on it for questions.
Yes.
But if you want to keep going, we can.
Yes. So there is couple of questions for Jean I saw.
There were, and she answered them in the chat.
I didn't see that part. Okay. Okay. Let me move on with last pest. Okay. So this is a thrips species. Again, it is an invasive thrips. This was introduced to US not very long time ago. It was in 2000 when we saw that in Florida. Now, when you look at where it is located, it is basically present in a lot of states now, but officially not reported from many states. So this is a very tiny thrip species, again, very polyphagous, again, just like spotted lanternfly, it can feed on many insects, many plants species. So this is first introduced the Lake County here. It was the first spot. It was here. And following that, entomologists like me, we started going after in all the box stores and the garden centers, looking for plants shipped from either from Canada or from Florida, looking for it. And this is the image you see from Florida, but we did that in Georgia as well, and we found them in Georgia as well, and we know they are there in Georgia right now. So it is present in Georgia, and so why this is dangerous? Because this thrift species has an ability to quickly go in and become like a big pest immediately if it is not intervene in the beginning itself. So if you look at all these thrift species that we see in Florida and also in Georgia, we see this is much more like a smallest one ever that we have seen so far. So they are very small. We are talking about like couple of millimeters long. So very difficult to go off radar, and you might see damage. And often what we are seeing is that damage looks more sort of like a mite damage. So then what the problem is, we trade for mites, assuming that's a mite problem, but actually not. It's not a mite. It's a thrips problem. So you may not get a control. So that's why it is important to detect, to understand this thrips. So just like Western flower thrips that we are familiar with, so they lay eggs in the tissue of the plant, eggs hatch, and the nymphs go through a couple of stages. They do go into the soil, and they'll pupae and pre-pupae and pupa you'll find in the soil, and the thrips comes out. Okay, that's how their general biology. And this can happen in less than 2 weeks if the temperature is right, like about 27 degrees. We are talking about 80 degrees. It can complete in about in 2 weeks. Okay. Let me go in. And we see problems in ornamentals and also pepper. Pepper seem to be their magnet. They just like pepper. I hear from beans and other crops like beans and squashes, they are there, but not nearly as a problem. But on pepper, it is a big problem. And it basically shows the list of hosts that we are finding in the US right now. Okay. And this is damage on the gardenias. For some reason, they like gardenia. And we are seeing them a lot of problems in gardenias, especially those coming from other states to our state here. Okay. And damage looks very typical of a chili thrips damage. I don't know if you know the chili thrips damage. They like to go on the new developing shoots. Okay. And this is the broad mite damage appearance, like I was saying. It looks like a broad mite damage, but it's not that. It is a thrips damage. Let me stop here with this slide. Managing this pest is not that difficult if you can find early. The products like Expire, Spinosad and Trist, and those products really works really well. That's what we know. And there are many other products that we know that is a typical, we call it as a thrips material. They all work well, especially Mainspring, Sarisa, and those products as also. Some of the biopesticides like mineral oil and sesame oil also works well, but may not provide as and a good effects like the products like Expire and Spinosad. Okay. Okay, thank you so much. I don't know if there is any time for any questions here.
Yeah, if anyone still has any, you're more than welcome to. You can also email your questions to us or any of the speakers respectively. But let's just take a minute and let everyone know. Number one, remember to get us your sign-in sheets. You can email those to us at gtbop@uga.edu or mail the physical copy to our mailing address, which is at the top of that sign-in sheet again. And just, I know we have some folks who are waiting to be let out of the office. If you need to go, that's okay. But Matt, was there anything else that you wanted to say, or Jean, is there anything else you wanted to close with?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all being patient. Looks like it went up a few minutes. That's all right. Jean, thank you so much for the excellent presentation. Thanks for taking care of the questions also at the same
Yep.
time. I don't see any questions right now. Do you want to add anything or?
No, just if anybody had any questions, they're more than willing, they can email me and I'll be happy to answer any additional questions.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
a lot, Gene.
Yep.
Thank
All
you.
right. Bye.
Goodbye.